Alright, next story is The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. And before I get into it and into the lesson I took from it, I want to comment real quick on the video you may be watching. This may be before or after or even on the part where I'm fighting against Whitney, and true to my word before, she is hard to beat, especially in the circumstance I put myself. So, you get to see most of the pain I had to go through for that battle. Like, I lost a couple of times before I was able to beat her frickin' Miltank, and well, that's about the most suffering you'll see from my end. After that, it gets quite a bit better. Anyway, so on to the Silmarillion. The lesson I took from this one is all conflict is ultimately spiritual. So for anybody who doesn't know, Tolkien's that guy who wrote Lord of the Rings. Like, you know, he's the great-grandfather of all fantasy, I guess, at least modern fantasy, that is. So, though it's a lesser-known work of his, it's still Tolkien's work. So, it's quite vast, and it's a series of stories of Middle-earth before the Middle-earth we knew in Lord of the Rings. Like, it's his beginnings of all things Middle-earth. Like, let me just launch into it. There's a whole bunch of stories all lumped together in it. I'm not going to cover them all, but let's start at the beginning. So, the god of Tolkien's world is Eru Ilúvatar, or Ilúvatar, or whatever it's pronounced, but you don't see much of him except in the beginning. He was by himself in the great void of darkness until he called forth certain spirits, basically his angels, from that point forward. And they all represent different aspects of himself. They were called the Valar. And amongst them are lesser angels that are called Maiar, but the point is that the Valar, though aspects of himself, they were still their own entities when all was said and done, and they start like small babies, like small children, being mature and powerful, but not really knowing anything. So, in the timeless halls before time began, he would teach them music and personality stuff, but it was all music at first, and they were all taught separately, and they knew nothing but what Ilúvatar taught them. But eventually there came a day where, and I say day loosely, but where they all came together, and he had 3 great musics in which they all participated in an orchestra. So, in the first music, when they all played together their own separate pieces he taught them as a concert, there was one among them named Melkor. And this entity had been given the most power out of all of them. So this Valar, in his pride, wanted to increase and make more important his part than the other parts. So he started singing louder and more in repetition of his own part than the others, and some around him were astonished at it, but eventually bent to his will. Most of them did not, but quite a chunk of them did. In the second great music, he did the exact same thing again, and Eru Ilúvatar's face, which initially was smiling, became very stern, but he was able to incorporate Melkor's discordance among the concert into his track somehow, into his theme. And then the third great music begins, and, you know, Melkor does the same thing again. And Eru Ilúvatar finally silences the music, and he says, "Great are the Valar, and greatest of all is Melkor of the Valar. But anyone who seeks to become their own without my influence will only discover that, at their uttermost end, they come of me." So, Melkor is somewhat put to shame for trying to make himself more important than the others around him, and from that shame comes a secret anger. But then Ilúvatar shows all the angels coming into the outside of the timeless halls, this is Ea. Well, what is Ea? They look at this secret fire that's burning in the middle of the darkness, and from the fire erupts suddenly lands and trees and waters, winds in the air and animals and walking trees called Ents and whatnot, and they see a vision of the world that could be. And he says, "Behold your music." It turns out that the music they were singing was actually the world in creation as it would be. They essentially sang the world into creation. So all these various musical themes, some are deep like the ocean, and then some are light and fluttery like the lightest breeze of air. But all of them have their own parts in the world. And so, the Valar, not all the angels want to go into the world that they've had a part in, but the Valar turn out to be the angels who decide, yep, we want to intertwine ourselves with this world that we've sung into existence and never leave it. Basically, they become God's construction workers. Melkor also wants in with this stuff, so Eru Ilúvatar lets them all go in and begin what turns out to be a very laborious, project, I guess, because the music was just the vision that they could have. They actually have to make the stuff of their own powers. They have to make the earth, they've got to make the stars, and so on and so forth. But they have the power that they need to make each separate part. So I'm not going to get into every single one of the angels' nature, but I think there are 6 or 7 of the most important ones, and then there's Melkor on the other side. Melkor is essentially Satan. Just like in the Bible, where Satan wanted to increase his own importance and eventually overthrow God and be God, Melkor is essentially trying to do the same thing. Like, he can't rule the timeless halls outside of existence, but he can have the ruling hand in what becomes Middle-earth. So, once the Valar go down there, Melkor says, "I name this place to myself forever." But the head of the Valar, the one who most clearly perceives the will of Ilúvatar, his name is Manwë. And he's like the king of the airs and the eagles, and he sees all things. So he says, no, you're not going to have your way, for it was not you alone who created this stuff. So he and the other Valar, the good guy angels, all come together, and though Melkor is nearly as strong as all the others put together, they are eventually able to push him back and keep him away from their works. Though it does cost them in this first great war of the Valar. A lot of things that were at first get destroyed. Mountains are built up and Melkor hews them down. Valleys are delved and Melkor flattens them out. Seas are made and Melkor spills them on the land, and so on and so forth it goes. Melkor is a jerk. But eventually, with lots of effort, the Valar do manage to make the world. And the world is not merely for their own pleasure, but, how is it said? Ilúvatar has 2 sets of children coming into this world eventually. The elder race and the younger race. The elder are the elves, and the younger are the race of men. So, part of the reason they made this labor of love was in preparation for basically God's children races to come that will in some ways be even more glorious than themselves. So the first music was the first battle of the Valar before the children ever came. However, the second theme is going to be the much longer ongoing battle of Ilúvatar's children against the evil forces of Melkor. Now, Melkor is freaking evil, though at first he sought to order all things as he would. And when he was denied it, and when he sought to make things in his own image, he could not make, only corrupt. Like, there were a couple of things in the beginning, at the height of his power, he could actually make, even though he had to use, God's power, borrow it to make it. But in the end, all he could do was mock what was. So let me very briefly get into the Valar, just so you can see the nature of things. I mentioned Manwë. Basically, he's the Zeus of this pantheon, though they're not gods. They're just construction angels, essentially. But he is the king of the world as is, of Ea, of Middle-earth, creation. And he takes as his wife Varda, who is basically the queen of light and of stars, and the one that the elves love most. She's called Elbereth to them. Not that it really matters that much. Let's see. My boy Ulmo, my favorite one, is Ulmo, the one who's in charge of the waters. And eventually, God's children, they do in some ways rebel because Melkor has influence on them, but Ulmo never abandons them, even in their rebellious state. That's why I like him so much. But he's in charge of the waters, both the oceans and the rains and vapors of any sort. So he is pretty much anywhere in Middle-earth that one could call to him. He will hear them. He does not have a wife. He's alone. Alwe. That's the guy who's basically in charge of the earth and its minerals. Like anything that is stone and clay and otherwise, Alwe had a hand in. And the dwarves. Alwe, he's kind of like Melkor in the sense that he also wants to have his own sort of creation. But unlike Melkor, he is humble, and when he eventually makes the dwarven race, knowing that Melkor is someday going to strike again, he wanted to make sure that they were hard and strong and resistant to anything that Melkor could do to them. But when all was finished, when he had made their forms and started teaching them the secret language of the dwarves, Iluvatar came to him and said, "Okay, why did you attempt this? You know that the secret fire lies with me, and they cannot have any will of their own except what you do to move them like puppets on a string." And so he's rather ashamed at that point and says, "May my works be for you. Like, you made me as a creator, and here I am creating. But I do not mock you in doing this thing, but even the lesser may, try to please his father without causing trouble. Yet, shall I not destroy the work of my conceit?" And he moves to destroy the dwarves. But at that point, they gain their own willpower, and they beg him not to destroy them. And he sees then that Iluvatar has showed him mercy and favor in giving them their own unique souls. And he says, "I've accepted the dwarves as adopted children to my own initial two. However, they're not going to come before the first two. Or at least not the first one, the elves." So essentially, the elves are currently somewhere asleep in the earth, as though in stasis, but eventually they will wake. And the Valar don't know exactly when, so they are continuing to make in anticipation. But anyway, that's Alwe, the father of the dwarves and also the maker of all things earth, essentially. Then there is Mandos, who is the doomsman of the Valar. And this guy I don't like very much. He's like a good-aligned Grim Reaper. His place is called the Halls of Mandos, where the dead go to wait until the end. And he knows things that are going to happen, but he never speaks it unless at the bidding of Manwë the king. Let's see. There's Yavanna, who is the wife of the Earth guy, Alwe. She's in charge of basically all the flowers, all the trees, anything that blooms green, and the fruits of the earth and whatnot. And all this is going somewhere, I promise. Like, a good story requires a good setting to set up, and boy, Tolkien made an ambitious project out of this. I'm trying to remember who the last guy worth remembering is. There's several of them that I haven't commented on, but they don't have an extreme part. I guess I'll mention Tulkas the Strong real quick. He's the guy that eventually, when Melkor once again tries to make war on the Valar just before the elves awaken, Tulkas is the one that's able to turn the tides and ultimately bind Melkor up. So I guess the first theme of the three doesn't officially end until the coming of Tulkas. But when the elves first awake, one of the Valar becomes aware of their existence at one point, and he's like, "Oh geez, they're here, and some of Melkor's monsters are already starting to chase them down. We can't have that." So they eventually combine their strengths, they manage to take down Melkor without destroying too much of creation, and they bind him in chains and put them in... what is the place that the Valar live? the place of the Valar. I can't think of it right now, but they take him back to their home base, and they put him in, like, God prison for several 100 years. 1,000 years? Whatever. So in the meantime, now that bad guy Satan is out of the way, not out of the picture, but out of the way, now the Valar come to the elves and invite them to come over to... Man, this is bothering me that I can't remember the name of the place. But eventually some of the elves go, though some of them choose to stay. And they are not to have their wills usurped. Like, they will do what they want to do, and the Valar are not gods over them. They do not have authority to make them do this or that. But some of the elves of their own free will do come to Valinor. That's what it's called. That's where the Valar live. Well, makes sense. Valinor. And the elves have broken up into several, I don't know, hierarchies, I guess, and they all have their own kings and whatnot. So I'm not going to get into all the various names. There's already a bunch of names that Tolkien's juggling. But here's where I want to bring up Feanor. There's two really big characters in the Silmarillion. One is Melkor, who becomes Morgoth, and the other is Feanor, who is the greatest of all the elves, or at least the most well-known back in the Silmarillion. So the elves eventually get to Valinor, and they prosper with the Valar, especially while Melkor is out of the way and sitting in his dungeon waiting to eventually have another hearing. But until then, the elves prosper, they learn the craftsmanship of Alwe, and learn the other arts that the creator angels have to teach them, and in some things they surpass them. So, talking about Feanor here, he comes from a high royal family, and his dad, who is the king of this family, initially had a first wife, who, when the elves initially started out, they were to birth lots of children and whatnot and populate the earth, very much like in the Bible, Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply, that sort of thing. But when his mother bears him, all of her strength, all of her soul, all of her immortal elf energy that might have otherwise gone into generations of other elves, it's all passed into Feanor, and it is such a struggle for her that, when Feanor is born, she's just completely exhausted, and she's like, I need to rest, I need to rest. And she goes to Lorien, which existed even way back at the beginning, back then, for rest. But she eventually puts herself down to sleep and doesn't wake up again. She becomes the first immortal elf to die. For anyone who didn't know, whereas men are like, us, they might live longer than we do in Tolkien's world, but they still die. They live a pretty relatively short time, maybe 100 years, and then that's it. They die, their spirits pass to the halls of Mandos. Elves don't. Elves are pretty much immortal unless they are grievously wounded in battle, or... I forget what else does it, but as long as nothing hinders their life, they'll just continue living on and on forever and ever. Sickness does not touch them. So the fact that Feanor's mom just dies because of this birth of him, that's very significant. But his dad does eventually remarry, take another elf wife, and she bears him a couple of other children. So Feanor's got a couple of half-brothers. But his half-brothers are not as gifted as himself. Feanor, as an elf prince, is just above and beyond. There's never been an elf more skilled than the others. He rises in the ranks of Alwe until he surpasses him. His mind is very much his own. He's very willful. He's not necessarily evil to the point that, his pride blinds him to all else, but he doesn't tend to be swayed by very many people. He will have his own way. But, he's still relatively good at heart, because that's what comes of living amongst the Valar, which are good, aligned angels. So here is where the title of the Silmarillion really kicks in. Feanor makes 3 jewels of light. These are called the Silmarils, and I don't think I can adequately describe them because no words will do it justice. You know, you might think of some sort of pretty gemstone that you saw one time that was reflecting the light very well. The Silmarils are not that. I guess I better talk about the two trees for a second, because that's going to be relevant later. So in Valinor, Yavanna, basically the construction angel in charge of trees and flowers and fruit and stuff, she made two great trees. And one was the tree of gold, the other was the tree of silver, and they were blessed by the light of Varda, so that they had this sacred light glowing, and before the sun and moon, these were the things that caused the world to glow. Well, except for starlight. There was starlight too, but whatever. And so, from the holy light of these trees, Feanor was somehow able to make jewels that could lock the light inside, and it was a holy sort of light. And not only did it make the jewels the most glorious jewels ever created, but even the light from the jewels reflect in other things and make other things more beautiful by their presence. I mean, these Silmarils... Just one Silmaril is basically worth like a quarter of the rest of the creation put together. These are things worth fighting over, as it turns out is the case. So you could see how all this immortal spirit and power of Feanor's mother passed into him in this great creation amongst his creations. Now comes the evil. Melkor, after a long time in prison, eventually gets released in Valinor, and being a very clever evil entity, he feigns that he's learned his lesson and he's going to try to help the creation that he's since hindered. And he still has powers, he still can be a force for good in the world if he truly does repent. But, you know, being Tolkien Satan, he's just beyond any sort of subservience to anyone. He will have his way. At best, he will pretend to be subservient. And most of the other Valar, because he is so crafty, they do fall for his act. But my boy Ulmo doesn't. Ulmo always suspects there's still something going on with Melkor. And Melkor knows he can bide his time, because remember how in the three great orchestras in the beginning of Before Time, several other angels turned their allegiance to him? One of those was Sauron. And Sauron was not captured whenever the Valar eventually went in and captured his boss. So Sauron's meanwhile off somewhere in the world preparing for the return of Melkor someday. So Melkor knows he's got an exit planned out if he needs it, but for the time being, he starts planting seeds of discord among the elves. You know, good guy angels, the Valar, good guy elves, but here's this evil amongst them in their presence. And this evil teaches them how to forge these sorts of jewels, how to make these sorts of houses. I don't think he ever bothers with shipbuilding, but everything that he says proves very useful in crafting stuff, and he gives even seemingly good advice when it comes to, you know, interactions with others. And the reason that's important is because Feanor never really liked his half-brothers very much. His father, when his mother died, gave all his love to him. Well, not all of it. He gave some of it to his half-brothers, but, you know, Feanor was Daddy's favorite. And Feanor, like, losing his Silmarils is probably the hardest blow to him, but losing his father, I wouldn't even say it's a close second. I'd say it's impossible to tell which would hurt Feanor first. Losing his father's love or losing the Silmarils. Like, those things are almost of equal value in his heart. But there comes a point where Melkor starts to speak of the making of weapons. These are things that, up until this point, there's this one huntsman Valar whose name escapes me right now, but he was the one who found the elves in the first place while he was hunting Melkor's monsters, and so he brings them to Valinor. But Up until then, it's just been bows and arrows for shooting monsters, but they were held only by the huntsman angels. But now, Melkor speaks of the making of them and how to craft them and whatnot. Not, of course, to be used on fellow elves. No, nothing like that. Just for, defense, in case you need it. He's very subtle with his lies, you see, in case that hasn't been made abundantly clear. So, there comes a point where, because Melkor has been slowly and steadily setting up these little family issues amongst some of the elves, Feanor especially, Feanor starts to become somewhat jealous of his brother Fingolfin. Fingolfin, seeing that Feanor has made several swords in the elf house, goes up to his father, says, I'm a little worried about Feanor. And then Feanor just walks in the middle of it, and he's like, aha, it's just as I guessed. My half-brother is trying to usurp my place in the eyes of my father. And that's important because eventually the time may come where the rule of the house is passed on to Feanor. Like, Feanor is royalty. And so the fact that it might go to Fingolfin, that is something that Feanor will not abide. So he does something that, in the thousands of years that the elves have lived together, has not yet happened. He puts his sword to his own brother's chest and says something to the effect of, "See here, half-brother, this sword is sharper than your tongue. Try once more to, usurp the love of my father, and, perhaps the house of, his house will be short of, one arrogant elf." Now, he has no business saying this. His half-brother, Fingolfin, is there is no fault with him. He is loyal, he is strong, he is wise, he is a bro. Fingolfin is, the pinnacle of all elves. He's the guy that you want as your king. Nothing wrong with the current elf king, but still, between Fingolfin and Feanor, yeah, Feanor might be more talented, but Fingolfin, he is the more noble of heart. So, a lot of the other elves see this going on, and they complain about it, and the Valar become aware, and so they call Feanor to their circle of doom, and they say, "You can't be doing this to your own brother. We're putting you in the be nice corner for 10 years, and then afterwards, you need to make up with your brother, and all will be well at that point." And Fingolfin's like, "It's okay. I do not grudge him. I forgive him," because Fingolfin's a bro. But the Valar are like, he's got to learn his lesson. Feanor's been pretty willful up until now. So, in the meantime, they continue to question other elves that, it's not just Feanor that Melkor has been messing with. He's been spreading discord amongst several of them, and all of them think that they're the only ones who really know how to make this special sword or this special spear, that kind of thing. So, eventually, the Valar figure out, oh, Melkor is at the bottom of all this. We thought that he'd repented, but no, he didn't. And almost just in the corner nodding his head I told you. So they go to grab Melkor and put him back into God Prison, but Melkor at this point has already made his escape. He knew ahead of time that this stuff was going to happen. Probably as soon as he saw Feanor being dragged off to be questioned, he was like, oh boy, the jig's about up here. So, in the meantime, Melkor, the reason that he gives Feanor special attention is, hey, those 3 Silmarils. Melkor is one who wants the rulership of the world for himself, and those are 3 fine jewels for his would-be king's crown. Being an evil entity, of course he's going to lust for things that don't belong to him, covetous. So he goes to Feanor and he says, "Behold, you've been unjustly kicked out. Did I not tell you truthfully it would be good to make weapons and whatnot? And so, you know that you're not safe. If the Valar did this to you, what else do you think they'll do to you? They might even try to come to you and take your Silmarils someday. I know them. I'm myself a Valar, am I not?" And Feanor almost hears the truth in the lies of the words. However, as soon as Melkor brings up the Silmarils, he's like, oh, Melkor probably wants the Silmarils too. And he's like, "Get you gone, you jail crow of Manwë." And he slams the door in the face of the most powerful Valar in all of creation. And Melkor is pissed, but he's also afraid that he's soon going to be caught, so he has no choice to retreat. But he doesn't retreat for long. He is bent on getting revenge and also getting those Silmarils. So he goes to basically the darkest corner of creation, where Shelob's great-great-great-great-great-grandma still abides. This is a giant spider entity called Ungoliant. And whereas she was initially one of the dark angels, the evil angels that sided with Morgoth in the beginning, Melkor, since then she's more or less gone her own way, done her own thing, and her thing is she eats light, and from it spews webs of sheer darkness. So she is unlight. Even in the brightest places, she is able to make a cover of magical darkness. So Melkor goes to her and says, "Hey, I need your help." And she's like, "What are you going to give me for it?" He says, "Anything that you want, I will give with both hands open." And so, despite Valinor being a stronghold of good guys, Melkor and Ungoliant eventually do decide to brave the trip. And they time it during a point of celebration. They wait 10 years pass, and is it 10 years? Well, whatever. It's a time of celebration where everybody comes together, kind of shakes hands, make up. They're trying to dissipate or make an end to the seed of discord that Melkor had amongst the elves. And as token, they have Feanor summoned to the Circle of Doom, where Fingolfin, his brother, is waiting for him, and the two of them kind of shake hands at that point, and Fingolfin, still being a very kindly, good-hearted elf, says, "I remember no grievance against my brother, and I will follow him in any matters he desires hereafter," or something like that. And Feanor, he just kind of nods, and you could tell that he's somewhat penitent. He's like, "Okay, I might have acted a bit immaturely. I'm sorry." And so the two of them are in the middle of shaking hands when Melkor appears, and Ungoliant spreads this darkness and whatnot, and everybody's looking around all confused, and while they're confused, Melkor brings out a great giant lance and stabs into the two trees of light that had made this bright holy aura in all of Valinor. Like, these are giant trees. Think Yggdrasil, except, I don't know, two. Gold and silver. And when he stabs these trees, like stabbing a guy in the heart, the sap comes out like blood, and Ungoliant drinks it up until there is no holy light left from the trees. And except for the stars overhead, all is plunged into darkness in the whole world. And even in Valinor, all is dark, because as Ungoliant drinks, so more darkness does she spew out from her dark webs or whatever, the magical darkness, so that everybody is completely confused and disoriented. And by the time that Melkor and Ungoliant have gotten away, and everybody looks around, it's utter chaos. So there is a lot of weeping whenever the light finally does start to come back. Remember, Varda is basically the angel of light, so she is able to restore a little bit of light, albeit not holy light, just regular light. The winds of Manwë dissipate the darkness that had been brought by Ungoliant, and they see that their two trees are destroyed. The only holy light left in Valinor is locked in Feanor's 3 jewels, his Silmarils. And so at that point, they think to themselves, the trees, they're pretty much dead. However, Yavanna could revivify them if she had but a little of that initial holy light. Because here's the thing, the Valar are not gods. They are just constructor angels. And there's a thing that they may attempt but once and never again. So never again can they make the holy light as they could once. They give of themselves. They gave of themselves when they were making the world. So they became locked in with it. Before, they had the choice of coming into creation and leaving it, but now they are part of it. They are essentially sewn together in the fabric of the world they've made. So they can no longer do this holy light thing, this sacred light thing, but they have a little bit of seed material in the Silmarils to work with. And so everybody looks at Feanor, and Tulkas the Strong is like, "All right, Feanor, so what say you? You gonna unlock those Silmarils of yours and bring the light out? But who's gonna deny Yavanna? She made the trees, and Varda's the one who hallowed them and made the light available, so it's not even yours to begin with." But then one of the others, I forget who, says, "Don't hasten him now. This is a bigger decision than you know." And Feanor, who, if you'll remember, the Silmarils are near as dear to him as the love of his own father. He's hesitating on the spot, and he says, "Even as with the greater, so also the lesser. It may be that I can unlock my jewels, but I will never make their like again, and if I break them, I should break my own heart." And after a couple moments of indecision, his eyes harden and he says, "I will not do this thing, but if the Valar should force me in this matter, then I will indeed know that they are of Melkor's kin." At that point, news comes that Melkor, speak of the devil, has gone to Feanor's house, broken into his strongholds, killed his father, and stolen the 3 Silmarils. So it really didn't matter in the end whether Feanor had said yes or no to unlocking his jewels. He would have lost them anyway. But if he'd said yes from the first, maybe things would have turned out differently than they did after this. By the way, I'm looking at the time here. Yeah, okay. There is so much left to tell, but I've told pretty much the main heart of the story at this point. There's a bunch of stories after this, but they all come back to this moment. There's a reason it's called the Silmarillion. All this stuff revolves ultimately around the Silmarils. So, upon hearing that both his dad has been killed by Melkor and his 3 sacred jewels have been stolen, Feanor just breaks, and he curses Melkor, and he renames him Morgoth, the Dark Enemy of the World. So Morgoth officially has his Dark Lord title. And at that point, he's pretty enraged at the Valar too, because they didn't see him for the evil that he was, and they locked him away for an insufficient amount of time. Why didn't they just destroy him utterly? And obviously they're not safe even amongst the Valar themselves, the good guy angels, if they would allow this sort of thing to happen. So at this point, he storms off back to where the elves have made their home. And even though he's still not... I misspoke before when I said that his ban was up. It wasn't. He was still banned from coming unless summoned to Valinor, but even so, he marches into Tirion, the city of the elves near Valinor. And he calls the elves together and he says, "Look, the Valar initially called us here to Valinor over the seas, but Middle-earth had rivers that ran sweetly and forests that had beautiful things, and we remember those things. And are we just going to be here and be ruled over by the Valar, or shall we have our own way? The enemy of the world, Morgoth, has stolen the Silmarils. And, hey Valar, you gonna do something about this?" And the Valar are not willing to. And the reason they're not willing is because they fought with Melkor before, or Morgoth before, he's now Morgoth. And they know that when they fight with him, these are, epic level fights that will destroy the very substance of creation because of the battles. Like, this isn't a bunch of men running out into the field with swords and stabbing each other and maybe a couple clods of earth get kicked up. No, this is continents will be destroyed and put underwater sort of madness. So they know that fighting with Melkor is going to be so destructive that they need to come up with a better plan, and they can't be rash. But Feanor is in no mood to be reasonable. So, with his powerful words, remember, he does have all this spirit in him. His soul is a fiery burning. And so, he's got a lot of charisma to him. Like, as a D&D character, his charisma is like 32. So, he is able to persuade the vast majority of the elves to come to him back to Middle-earth, to where Morgoth's stronghold, Utumno? Is that it? Angband, that's where it was. Angband, his stronghold awaits, and he says, if the Valar are not willing to go, then we dare to go. We will be our own masters. We will surpass the Valar in all things, and we will regain the Silmarils. And at that point, he raises his sword, and he takes a terrible oath. And right away, his 7 sons, he had some sons, by the way, they spring to the oath, and they all raise their swords together, and they make this terrible oath. Like, neither elf, nor enemy, nor Balrog, nor anything in all of Middle-earth that claims a Silmaril and keeps it will have friendship with us. For that we alone claim, and we will destroy all, good guy, bad guy, neutral, anybody who gets between us and the Silmarils that my family rightfully owns. So, you know, it's an oath made in haste, and it is not like the elves to do things hastily, but, you know, Feanor, he's charismatic, he's had things stolen from him, he is somewhat to be pitied in this matter, because he was wronged. Deeply wronged by frickin' Satan himself. And so the vast majority of the elves end up following him because with his father dead, he is now the rightful ruling king of the elves that came to Valinor. But Fingolfin, he's like, his half-brother's like, we really shouldn't be doing this. But then he remembers in the Circle of Doom how he said, I will follow you in all things, Feanor. And so he thinks to himself, all right, well, fine, I'll go with you, but I'm going to have my own separate marching company. So Feanor and his first company march out, Fingolfin and his own company march sometime after, and then there's a few stragglers left behind who know that the Valar are good guys and they've done nothing wrong and they don't want to leave them. But they kind of fall out of the tale at this point. So there are some sea elves that are... The thing about Valinor is there's a huge body of sea between Valinor and Middle-earth as we know it. And so, to cross the sea, one needs to have very high-quality, high-level ships. And the sea elves at the shore, they're the only ones who've made ships, at least such ships that can carry the elves back to Middle-earth. And so when Feanor goes there, he demands them by the bonds of previous friendship to let them have their ships. And he reminds them, look, if it weren't for us, you guys wouldn't have built proper houses and had all these gems and whatnot, and you owe us. And if you don't lend us your ships, then you renounce your friendship with us. If Feanor is still very hot under the collar, there's a bit of a joke online about how the Silmarillion can be summed up in 3 words. Calm down, Feanor. But the Sea Elves say, we renounce no friendship, but we're not going to give you our ships that are akin to our children. Yeah, you might have helped build us our houses, but you didn't help us build these ships. We made of our own. And, you know, the fact that you're going after, what was his name? Morgoth? That's a very bad idea. If the Valar themselves were having trouble with him, what chance do you think you stand? This is irrational. Don't do this. Do not go forward. No, you can't have our ships. You can't. And so, they're not in the wrong here. But Feanor, who is hasty as ever at this point, he's still hot-blooded, he means to board their ships by force. And so the Sea Elves resist him. Weapons are drawn, and then comes the kinslaying of elves. One of the worst things that has ever happened in all creation. I say one of the worst, but not the worst. So, let me switch gears to the worst just for a second. Probably the most vile and backwards act ever done in creation in Ea is when Morgoth, found some stray elves at the very beginning, even before they were called to Valinor, and he takes them and he twists them, and from these first elves comes the race of orcs. Orcs were first elves before by pain and by dark arts, they were turned into the savage and merciless orcs. So, you know, the worst act can still be laid at Melkor's feet. Nevertheless, if this is not a close second, it's certainly in the top 5. Feanor kills his kin at the sea elves, until there are none left to resist. He joins battle with them. And in the meantime, the second company of Fingolfin is coming up behind, and them seeing swords drawn and not knowing what's going on, but having no time to think or talk, all they can do is attack those that are attacking their brethren. And it's only after the end of the battle that they realize what Feanor has done. And so they are heartbroken. And Feanor still wants to go forward because he's got the ships now. And so while they sail some ways, the people of Fingolfin, they are feeling so guilty about what they took part in. And when they finally do get to another piece of land, they're not in Middle-earth yet, they still have to go a little further, then they see a figure on a hilltop, and it looks like Mandos, that's it, the Doomsman. And he rebukes these guys for the kinslaying of their own brother elves, the Sea Elves. And he says, because you have done this, you are going to be dying left and right all over the place. And you're going to have hard battles, and you're going to suffer much. And even those of you who die nobly, when you come back to my halls, the halls of Mandos, and your bodiless spirits await the end of days, you will find little pity, even if the souls of those that you yourselves killed should plead on your behalf. And, the elves are mortally afraid here, but Feanor still says, yeah, we might have hardship, but we will be gallant nevertheless in our fight, and let it not be said that we're cowards, and we will have songs sung of us for the deeds that we dare. So Feanor is still undeterred. But he knows that Fingolfin does not feel as he does, and so he leaves Fingolfin's company behind whenever he takes the ships, and forces them to go through this hard ice path in order to eventually get back to Middle-earth, because now they can't go back to Valinor. Valinor's shut against them. The only way they're getting back there is if they are killed in their immortal bodies. So, the thing about elves and men is, whereas men are doomed to die from the beginning, it's called a strange gift of Iluvatar, God. God gives them the gift of being on Earth only temporarily, and then their spirits are brought back to the halls of Mandos for some greater purpose. Like, they're called the guests, the visitors, and they're going to be doing something else with their spirits before all said and done. So, basically, the first half of all life on Middle-earth belongs to the elves, whereas the second half will belong to men, and men will have some great part to play by their spirits in the end. But more on the men a little bit later. I'm getting close to the end here. I'm not going to be talking for too much longer. There's so much Silmarillion to talk here. But, like I said, the most core lesson that I took from the Silmarillion that guides my life is something Michael Knowles once said, several times said, that all conflict is ultimately spiritual. People who have differences of opinion about things good and evil, it all eventually gets traced back to the first good and evil. There's a spectrum of good and evil where there's complete black on one end, complete white on the other, and there's vast majority gray in the middle. But that gray does come of the black and the white. There wouldn't be moderation except for the extremes. Alright, so, at this point, Feanor's company has made it to Middle-earth, where they burn the ships. Like, they're not going back. And the burning can be seen even from far over the sea, where Fingolfin's company sees. They know they've been betrayed, they know that there's no ships coming back for them. But still, they cross this icy path in order to get there. Now, meanwhile, with Morgoth, he's back in Angband, he's got his 3 Silmarils, and, well, he's not in Angband just yet. He's run off with Ungoliant until she stops him, for she's become very powerful for drinking the holy sap of the sacred trees. And she's like, you promised me, you promised you would give me whatever I wanted with both hands open. And so he's initially trying to twist himself out of the deal, like, what more do you want? Have you not had enough to drink from the sacred trees? But nope, she wants more. So grudgingly, but without much choice, he surrenders to her all these various jewels that Feanor has made over his years and years in Valinor. But she says, "With the left hand only you give, and the right still clutches. Open your right hand." And he knows the 3 Silmarils are in that hand, and they're burning his hand because their holy light is something that he, a Dark Lord, cannot endure without great pain. Yet even then, he clutches them closely. And he says, no, you've had your fill. These I call for myself forever. But she's not having that. Ungoliant advances on him and ensnares him in her webs, and she's just about to take down what was once her Dark Lord way early on in the story, when he gives a great cry. And from his great shout, a bunch of Balrogs appear from Angband. Balrogs are essentially the lesser but still very evil Dark Angels that aligned with Morgoth from the first whenever he'd sang his dissonance in the orchestra. So his Balrogs come and they drive off Ungoliant with their fiery whips, and from there he's able to get back to Angband with his dark crown and his 3 Silmarils cut into it. And from Angband he declares himself once more the ruler of the world. But he is so attached to the world at this point that he can no longer take different shapes or dissipate into the atmosphere or do the things that the other Valar can, because he spends too much of himself, and so he becomes ever more bound to his stronghold of Angband. So he only ever hangs out in the basement while he gives orders and sent his minions to do all of his work. So Feanor's company get to Angband, and Feanor laughs, thinking, aha, I'm going to have my revenge after all. But his forces are not sufficient to get into Angband. They have this terrible battle, and his son, what was his name called? It'll come to me in a minute. There comes a point where Feanor gets too far away from the rest of his army, and those Balrogs I mentioned before, they surround him, and they are able, even for him, Feanor, the greatest and most talented and most skilled warrior of all the elves, eventually succumbs to them. I mean, for anybody who's watched Lord of the Rings, read the book, you know that even one Balrog was nearly enough to destroy Gandalf. Like, they basically destroyed each other. So, Balrogs are no joke, and there was multiple of them. So, Feanor does get mortally wounded, and he falls even with the gates of Angband in sight. And his sons manage to rescue him before they can cleave his body apart, but he says, even in his last breath, like, "Avenge me!" And his body turns to ashes because as the spirit flees his body, it is so fiery, it just burns his body to almost nothing. So, there's the end of Feanor right there, but in his sons, his spirit basically continues. They are very much like him. They are oath-bound, they are determined, they will let nothing get between them and the Silmarils. And so they will expend everything, their own lives, the lives of their followers around them. So, this whole time I've been talking, I'm trying to remember. Feanor has 7 sons, but he has one most famous son. Maedhros, that's it. Maedhros is his son that we hear about the most. He's the eldest son, but he gets taken in the battle, and Melkor lifts him up to a high mountain, hammers one of his arms to the side of the stone mountain, and there he is to hang until the other elves leave. Because Melkor is afraid of the elves. He didn't think that they'd follow him this far, and they are still children of Ilúvatar, and the power of Valinor is in them. They are still relatively young, they are strong, they have the means to resist him, and maybe possibly even overcome him. But because they will not give up going against him just because Maedhros is taken, therefore he leaves Maedhros hanging there. Now, enter Fingolfin's party. Those guys have finally made it across the ice path that would have separated them otherwise from their kin. And it was a hard struggle, and they lost several hundreds of elves, I guess, along the way. It was it was one of the worst things that elves have ever had to endure. So they have no love for Feanor's company by the time they've made it over. But there's a certain friend in Fingolfin's company who appreciated, he was friends with Maedhros back in the days before Melkor's lies separated them. And so he decides that he is by himself going to brave the distance into Angband itself and attempt to rescue his friend. And with the help of one of the Eagles of Manwë, he manages, albeit he has to cut off doggone, he's got to cut off his friend's hand to free him from the bond that's holding him to the mountain. But even then, he's able to save Maedhros, that's it. I forget this dude's name, I just know he was friends with Maedhros. And by this great act of friendship, these two are able to reconcile the two basically opposite armies. Like, the army of Feanor is now without a leader, and they're very ashamed of themselves for ditching their companions, so they are properly penitent. And the other army, Fingolfin's army, they're still good guy elves at heart. Like, elves have always mostly been good aligned, and so they are willing to forgive because of the great love shown between these two friends who risked much. And so the elves, they reconcile, but because they had hesitated from the first, therefore Morgoth was able to resist them. And basically all the stories that follow in the Silmarillion are about how Morgoth continues to hold his ground and send out more monsters and armies against them. Sometimes it's orcs and dragons, Balrogs, whatever. And so there's this sort of state of war that never wholly ceases. But all the stories that follow are about this war. I'm not going to get into the stories, not even the story of the most famous story of the bunch, aside from the ones I've told. The story of Beren and Luthien. That's something that Aragorn actually brings up whenever they're waiting for the Nazgul to get them in Amansul. Anyway, but, you know, if anything I've said for nearly this past hour at this point has, I don't know, touched your heart, I suppose. The Silmarillion, is it a long read? Oh my goodness, it's a long read. It's like half a Bible long. But it is way good. Like, this is still the same Tolkien that wrote Lord of the Rings, that wrote the Silmarillion. So it is of higher level reading, I would say college level somewhat. Maybe not college level, but these days it would be. But, you know, if you can find the guy, his name escapes me, but if you can find the guy who reads it in an audiobook, that dude's reading is tremendous. So, you know, have a listen to the Silmarillion if you've got, like, I don't know, 20 hours to spare, or is it 20 hours? It's the better part of 20 hours for sure. It's something that I listen to in increments. Like, I'll take road trips, and so I'll kind of listen to it while I got nothing else going on, and, you know, it's a good book, okay? It's a good book. So, alright, that'll do it for the Silmarillion. I don't really know what I'm going to be doing for next time, but you'll hear it in a couple of seconds. Thanks for listening, everybody.